Please remain seated. The show will begin in 3, 2...
Like a Hellcat.
Hello, ghoul friends, those who are freaky chic, fans of the supernatural, and all things spooky. I am your host, FandomTraveller87, and welcome back to my channel. You have your own listener story that you'd love to share with me? Contact me at my business email at hopegivesyouvings.com@gmail.com to send your story directly to me, and if you wish to remain anonymous, that is fine as well. The story can be a true horrifying experience of yours, whether paranormal related or perhaps just a creepypasta. And, of course, thank you again for listening. Now let's sink our teeth right back in to where we left off, dive right back into the crypt. Alright, let's do this. The past few months after returning home with my parents and dropping all contact with my grandma, my grandfather Lee often visited us, and he'd spend the weekends while my mom and dad were working late managing the restaurant, since no one else was currently available those 2 days. Finances were tight, and we needed all the extra money to help pay the bills, so many of us within the family do the best we can to support each other. My grandmother Ellen still acted hands-on in the business, running the floor and engaging with the customers while juggling payroll and doing paperwork. I stayed far away from her, kept my head down around her whenever possible. The grandma I knew was the most bubbly and kindest person in the world, then turned into some hollow shell, half the woman she used to be. It's like she walked around with this big rain cloud above her head, and she tried to hide any sort of discomfort or sadness with a painted smile. I could tell she was oppressed, but as I mentioned before, she didn't utter a word hardly to anyone unless somehow somebody said something to set her off, or did something that she didn't agree with nor like. As I said, she had just withdrew and gone about things, keeping to herself, eternally resentful, fearful, paranoid, just lost in some sort of daze. There was this wall she put up that no one could break through, and we all just watched her fall apart. One day, I celebrated my 11th birthday, and despite my silent protesting, we all agreed on celebrating it at the restaurant. I felt I was a little too old, but I didn't want to make a fuss about it because I knew we weren't like in the best situation money-wise, and the pizza was actually decent. The best part about the restaurant itself was the arcade, and I had saved months of allowance for tokens. I spent maybe like an hour or two at playing the games. Space Invaders, Doodle Jump, even tried my luck at a claw machine, and managed to win a Jasper plush. I played till my hands were numb, and when it was time for cake, I remember running to the table to blow out my candles, when I saw a familiar figure peering from behind the red curtains. Before I dive into that, I want to elaborate on something. I need to give you the full layout of the building because this will be crucial information for what happens later on in this story. The history of the building is in fact something that Nolan Bushnell, co-founder of Atari who created Chuck E. Cheese, didn't want the public to know about, which is why many of us would know about the 1977 opening of the first quote-unquote official restaurant in San Jose, California. According to my grandpa Lee, the development and dry run of the diner, our local Chuck E. Cheese, was known then and is known now as Chuckster's Dine-In and Arcade, which finished construction in September of 1972 and officially opened a year later. Nolan Bushnell, in May 1st of 1972, began the first dry run experiment of introducing the first prototype of the Chuck E. Cheese animatronic. For the first few months, the small town diner concept ran well for its first summer, but began to slowly decline over days and decades of operation due to staff shortages, rather unfortunate, unexplainable incidences, employees getting injured during their shifts, contracting illnesses, or going insane even. I didn't find this out until I went to college, and my grandpa had gone sick, and because of my parents telling him to keep quiet about it, Chuckster's Dine-In and Arcade was constructed to have 3 different sections. The main one is when you first walk in. You've got a bowling alley on the far right side, and the stage in the center of the room, and the left, the bathrooms, and of course the arcade. There was also a counter to order food and a kitchen in the back. As I was sitting down, the retro rock music from the 70s was playing, and this is when my blood ran cold. With janky and stiff movement was the Chuck E. Cheese animatronic, swaying from side to side, the exact same one I encountered down in the basement. He was clothed, and he looked cleaner than before. And that same day, I heard my aunts and uncles commenting about how my grandma was able to finally finish making repairs on it, since it was the exact same prototype that was showcased on the grand opening of Chuckster's Dine-In and Arcade. "That thing's always been a bit off to me," said my aunt, my mom's older sister, having whispered to it to the others sitting next to her. "I thought she had it scrapped ages ago." "Shh, this is supposed to be a special day," replied her husband. "We agreed we wouldn't talk about it. It doesn't do anyone any good. You know what will happen if we do." I couldn't understand what was going on at the time, how everyone was acting so weird. They were all looking at the original Chuck E. Cheese prototype on stage, both uncomfortable and anxious, like they didn't want to be there. My grandma was the only one who smiled at this thing, and what made it even more unnatural was the fact she casually went onto the stage and stood next to it. And when the robot stopped moving for a few minutes, she hugged it like she had just reunited with a long-lost friend. This made us all speechless, and we all knew there was something mentally wrong with my grandma. She just gradually got worse and worse, on some downhill spiral. Then she invited me to come on stage and tried to force me to hug Chuck E. Cheese. At first it was gentle coaxing, then immediately switched to aggressive, venomous banter about how she worked so hard on getting him ready for my birthday and that I was being ungrateful, about how I was again being disrespectful and how I was being a big baby for not being nice and hugging this thing. This rat, in better terms, I think, that I knew from day one of finding it was dangerous. And I wondered if this robot was the cause of all the years of bad luck and misfortunes. I also recall my mom pulling my grandma aside and scolding her for her behavior on my birthday. For weeks since my birthday, they argued about it, and I eventually learned my grandma, as she had planned, was to give to me the prototype as a present. My parents blatantly refused the animatronic because they knew how it was affecting me, and everyone else in the family sided with them. This made my grandma even more furious, and eventually she turned on all of them and showed up less and less to the restaurant. She stopped coming to family gatherings for a while. Moving forward a bit, a couple years later, this is when something horrifying occurred. 13 years old, I had stayed at Chuckster's Dine-In and Arcade late with my parents, who were working in the office. I was sitting in the dining area doing my homework when I heard an odd noise coming from the stage. It started off as a click-click sound and then a growl, then static at the same time, muffled, distorted audio. The curtains were closed, and the prototype was shut off. The stage was dark. Maybe one of the technicians were running diagnostics on the robot to make sure it was working properly for business the next day. But when I went onto the stage and behind the curtains, there was no one else back there. Just me and the prototype. Then I noticed something on its mouth and shirt. Bloodstains. What the hell? I examined them, snapping some photos on my cell phone. The next camera flash, something changed. Chuck E. Cheese's eyes were missing in the last photo. Dark, hollow eye sockets, and there was this unsettling grin on the robot's face. This destroyed me. I turned white as a sheet and frantically ran to my parents to show them the photo. But when we returned to the stage, the curtains were opened and the robot was gone.